Um, so why don't we get started? Um, Laura's gonna lead for us today, so take it away, Laura.
All right, hi everyone. Welcome to our summer planting workshop with GrowNYC. Kristen did a quick intro before, but I'll do another really quick one. I'm Laura Casaragola. I'm a school gardens coordinator with GrowNYC, and I'm joined today by Kristen Fields and Benice Mock, who are also part of our GrowNYC team. Right. So here at GrowNYC, we have different programs to protect the environment, create green spaces, help people stay healthy, and give them opportunity to make a positive impact. In today's workshop, we're in a Zoom meeting, so you can just submit questions in the chat function. You can also feel free to put comments and helpful tips, and also if my screen share stops working or you can't hear me all of a sudden, feel free to put anything in the chat. We are recording the workshop today, and we are going to send you a follow-up email. So you'll get that sometime this week with the workshop recording, as well as with additional resources that we're going to go over today. And you can find it, all the additional resources, as well as a ton of other content on our GrowNYCdistancelearning.org website. So for today's workshop, we're going to go over a few different things. We're going to go over seasonal planting calendars. We're going to go over second season crops that you can plant during the summer and harvest in the fall. We're going to go over as well cover crops that you can plant this summer and fall. And we're going to end it off with some summer and fall harvest recipes, just as a fun recipe share to do. And a lot of the seasonal planting that I'm going to be talking about is kind of geared towards the New York City growing zone, which is USDA growing zone 7B. But if you're tuning in from somewhere with a different growing zone, I think this workshop will still be really useful and relevant to you because you'll learn how you can think about looking for your own seasonal planting calendars and learning to plan around your own growing seasons. So first, let's take a look at an example of a seasonal planting calendar. This is one that I really like. I saw it on the Cornell Cooperative Extension website, and they're based in New York. And I just liked how this one showed how you can have so many things going on throughout your growing season. And so you can see, what everyone kind of focuses on, which is when you plant your vegetables and fruits in the spring. But as you can see here, there's a lot of other stuff that can be happening in the summer, in the fall, and even over the winter. So what we're going to talk about today, we're going to cover a lot of the stuff that you see on this second half of this planting calendar. So we're going to talk about how you can plant vegetables in July and August, and how you can either sow the seeds directly in the ground, or you can plant transplants. We're also going to talk about different types of cover crops that you can grow that will be really beneficial to work into your garden as well, and are also very low maintenance. As we're talking about summer planting, the date that we're planning around and tiptoeing and doing a delicate dance with is when is the New York City frost date. And this is just an average first frost date for New York City is October 19th. And that can definitely change. Sometimes we have like a freak snowstorm, in October, and that's like a really hard frost. Sometimes we don't get a frost date until November. So the question that I want to help us answer today is, what can you do between now and when the frost hits in our growing zone? And so we have three growing options. We have our second season fall crops. So we're going to plant those around now or next month. We have the two different types of cover crops. I'm going to go more into depth on each of these three growing options. So you don't have to memorize everything that you see, all the bullet points here, because I'm going to go into them in a little more depth. And then afterwards in your follow-up email, you're going to get a link to see the list of all of these as well. So let's go into the first growing option, which is to fit in another growing season. So these are crops that you plant in July. Maybe you already knew what you wanted to plant before coming to this workshop and you already started planting. But if not, you still have a lot of time, all of this month of August and as well next month in September. And the goal for second season fall crops is we need to find things that are quick growing and plants that are tolerant to the cold. And that way they have, just a couple of months to grow before we get hard frosts. So that's why we want them to be like quickly growing plants. And then we also want things that are cold tolerant in case our first frost date comes a little early. Because if it's a plant that is hardy to the cold or tolerant to the cold, that first little frost is not going to affect its growing. It's only after a lot of hard frosts hit us in like November or December that it'll start to really affect the plant. But otherwise, they're pretty cold tolerant. And when you're looking to plant these second season fall crops, and you can see here it can be in a bed that you've maybe recently harvested from, so you have this like empty bed, you want to fit something else in, you can either seed start yourself indoors and then plant it outdoors. That's something I would do if you have like a lot of extra time and you have the expertise and you want to like give yourself a project. But I would say the easier thing to do, especially now that we're already in August, is either buy transplants of something that you can plant in the ground outside, or find things that you can direct seed in the ground right now, and they'll grow so fast that they still have time to fit in another season. So these are some examples, and this is not even an exhaustive list. So this is just to kind of get you thinking of, look at all this stuff that you can actually grow in August and September, you can plant and get a full harvest out of. So the first category is definitely think about root vegetables. So we've got radishes, which are one of the fastest growing things. Working with school gardens, it's one of the things we recommend people to start with. I don't know if they're sick of hearing us tell them to grow radishes, but they take only 28 days from planting the seed until you get to harvest them. So that's basically a month. So radishes are really great for that. Carrots, turnips, and beets are also cold tolerant and they grow pretty fast. We've got greens are a great class of vegetables to grow in the cooler weather. They actually often prefer cooler weather. So that's when you can grow all types of lettuces. You can grow spinach, kale can grow really well. If you have like any sort of season extension, like if you use row cover or row fleece over your garden beds, kale can actually grow throughout the winter as well. You can do mustard greens. Pretty much most greens will do well in the fall. There are also some cold tolerant herbs, which are great to grow as well. So some examples of cold tolerant herbs are parsley, mint, thyme, chives, oregano, sage, and sorrel. You do want to check before you plant your herbs. There are more cold tolerant herbs that I could have added to this list, but I ran out of space. But there are also other types of herbs that are really warm weather herbs. So I would not recommend planting basil in like September, because basil loves the sun and the heat. But the ones on this list are all good to go. And then another category of good second season fall crops are brassicas. And that will include things like cauliflower, broccoli, and cabbage. And for those ones, I do recommend getting transplants or seedlings of these things, because they do take longer to mature, but they are cold tolerant. So you can just buy transplants. Usually they're not too expensive, but it's not quite as cheap as just buying a pack of seeds, which the root veggies, greens, and herbs, you can do all those from seed. Kristen, feel free to jump in if people have questions that are specific to the topics.
Cool, you're good so far.
All right. So I really wanted to add garlic into this workshop as well, because it's such an interesting type of plant, and the season it grows in is a bit different from any other plant we're going to talk about today. And so garlic is actually something that you plant in October or November. And you can just use garlic that you buy at the green market or at the grocery store, and you can plant each clove as if that's like the seed for the new plant. So you want to find your largest, fattest cloves of garlic, and you plant them. As you can see in this photo, this is a student at our teaching garden on Governor's Island, planting some garlic and watering it. And it's a really low maintenance plant. So you plant it in October, November, as you can see in the photo. And then you do want to put some straw on top of it during the winter, which will help protect it from really heavy snow or just really cold weather. And then you'll start to notice really early in the spring, it'll pop up and start growing. And it takes a few months to grow, and then you can harvest it in the middle or end of summer. So right now, we're actually harvesting the garlic that was planted this time, like in October, November last year. We're harvesting it right now. And you do need to plant the garlic in the fall. You can't just decide, oh, I'm going to plant it in the spring and expect it to come through by the end of the summer. It needs that period of like cold hibernation. That's part of its growing process. And this is a picture of the garlic just popping up on April 1st. So you'll see it growing before most of your other plants, and it's frost tolerant because we're still getting frosts all throughout April, but it's a really cool plant to grow. And this is a resource that we've added to our distance learning page, and we'll email you the link to all of this as well. This is a really in-depth vegetable and herb fall planting calendar for New York City. And this is great because if you're a detail-oriented person, you're gonna love this. If you're not a detail-oriented person, you're also gonna love this because all of the work has been done for you already. So you can see what can you direct seed outdoors. So you can see here, we missed corn. That had to happen like June 5th. But if we go to the next page, we have all these things that you can direct seed outdoors in August and September, including things like collards, onions, radicchio, if that's how you say that, I'm not even sure. So we have a lot of things. You can still, get some fennel in probably. We've got turnips, escarole, kohlrabi, spinach. So this is the more complete list that we'll leave you with so that you have all of these ideas. And the reason we love this calendar, especially for our school gardens program, is that a lot of teachers and educators want to plant with students when they come back in the fall. And so there's all these things. We're even starting the school year later, maybe this year. So there's still a lot of things that you can plant when students come back. And then you see here at the bottom of this list is garlic, and it takes about 240 days to mature because that's what you're going to be harvesting the following summer. All right, so that was the section of the workshop on fall crops that you can plant.
Laura, why don't I jump in now with a couple of questions that popped up on this section before we move on? So, okay, so when you were going over things that you could plant now, someone was wondering about string beans and whether or not string beans are something you could plant now.
Let's see, I know peas are definitely something that's kind of related that you could just fit in the last season right now. I'm not sure about beans, honestly. I might have to look that up.
Okay.
Good question.
Through you. And then someone else was asking, they said they cover their bed in winter with plastic to protect from feral cats. If they wanted to plant garlic, is the plastic going to disturb them?
That's a good question. I don't think it would disturb the garlic because the straw is also acting as an insulator. So I think the straw and the plastic would function in similar ways. I don't think it would disrupt. I don't think the plastic would keep the soil in the bed so warm that the garlic wouldn't get its like cool weather stratification process in. So I think that should be fine.
And then we have a few questions about straw and where you can get straw.
Oh God.
So many, actually several questions about straw. Okay, so garden centers will have it, or I used to work at the Queens County Farm Museum, and people would order it from there as well. Laura, where else have you ever sourced it?
I mean, I've sourced it from the green markets just by asking farmers if they could bring me some from their farm, which you might have to pay a little bit just for the trouble it is for them to like honor that request. But a lot of times they bring like those hay bales in anyways for people to like sit on and take pictures with. So there's that. I think also if straw is kind of an odd thing to source here in the city, you could also use dried leaves, which are a bit easier to come by.
About pine needles as well instead of straw.
I'm not sure about pine needles. Usually that's fine to use as a mulch on garden beds, and I've done that before. You might want to just do a little research into if the pine needles put any sort of like have any sort of effect on the garlic, like some sort of weird interaction, because certain things that you use as a mulch will put different things into the soil. So maybe just like do a quick Google before, but I think that would work as well. And
yeah, sorry. So people are also saying in the chat they buy straw on Amazon. So
really? Okay.
I don't think there's anything you can't get on Amazon.
Yeah, I guess something else that's kind of I wanted to mention about growing garlic that I recently learned is that you shouldn't plant it in the same bed where you just had brassicas or things from the cabbage family, because it can reduce the growth of the garlic by like 60%.
Wow.
So that's like a little detail I had never learned before, but that's why it's good to kind of, before you plant something, do a little research and just see if there's anything weird or alarming that pops up, like do not plant with pine needles. But I think it should be okay.
And folks are also saying in the chat that like you can do beans in August.
Oh yeah, so, okay, good.
Yeah,
cool. I feel like they would be pretty cold tolerant.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
All right, so let's pause there and let's go on to cover crops. I know we have a few more.
Yes.
Okay,
so,
one last one actually. Is it important to use organic garlic?
I would recommend it. I think that's if you use organic garlic, that means that it's definitely not a GMO variety. So it should be able to reproduce a bit better. And that's also why I'd recommend getting a garlic from like the farmer's market, because you know that that's been grown locally and is like a variety that's meant for growing. But I'm also a big fan of just doing a lot of science experiments with plants and seeing what happens. So that would also be fun to plant like a conventional garlic clove.
Yeah, compare
a few of organic ones. It really, I mean, I imagine there's also a lot of like farmers at our green markets who are not certified organic, but their garlic would probably work fine as well, because they're not generally using a lot of pesticides or GMO varieties anyway. But organic is a guarantee.
All right, yeah, let's go on to cover crops.
Okay. So I am a big fan of cover crops because they, number one, are so low maintenance, and they give you all of these amazing benefits, such as improving the nutrients in your soil and giving back a lot of the nutrients that some of your crops maybe sucked up from the soil that season. Cover crops also suppress weeds from growing as much in your garden bed. It prevents erosion because all of the root systems of the cover crops hold the soil in place over, you know, the winter or the season when you're growing it. It holds it all in place and also acts as like a cover or a blanket or a type of mulch on top of your garden bed during the winter. And then it can also reduce pest problems, because a lot of cover crops, what people use them for as well is they release certain types of chemicals, like natural plant chemicals, into the soil that can actually like kill nematodes or reduce other types of pest problems. So there's a lot of good benefits, but I've found even with my own like background of home gardening, I never really used them before. I always thought of it as something that like industrial farms do, or, like actual agricultural farms. But it actually can be a great thing to work into your smaller home or school or community gardens as well. So the way that cover crops work is you plant the seeds in the summer or the fall, and they're really easy to plant. You basically just, you get your cover crop seed and you just sprinkle it, like you just throw it into the beds and you rake some soil around it loosely. So you don't have to be very intentional. It's kind of fun to just fling it in there. They start to grow, and their biomass, both the plants that are growing above the ground act as a cover or a blanket, and then the biomass below the ground, the roots are holding all your soil in place and adding nutrients and preventing soil erosion. And then in the spring, all you have to do with the plants is cut them or mow them down, and then you just incorporate them and turn them into the soil, where they'll decompose and add even more nutrients into the soil. And that is considered like a no-till method, if you're familiar with that term. If you're not, we can go into that in the Q&A if you're interested. There are two types of cover crops. There's the winter killed, which die off during the winter, and then there's the winter hardy, which actually can continue to grow for a lot of the winter. But they're both really good options. Winter killed, some options are oats, field pea, which is featured in this. Oh, and I'll go back to this photo. This is hairy vetch, which I always thought was a funny name. But it's a type of cover crop. They can be quite beautiful and aesthetically pleasing. So that's another benefit of cover crops. So with these winter killed cover crops, the way that they work is you need to plant them in August. So let's say you just harvested some things and you don't feel like growing more crops in them for this season, and you're ready to just put in your cover crop and go on vacation. So you can plant one of these, like 4 really popular winter killed cover crops. They're gonna grow really quickly. They're quite resistant to the cold, but in November, after a few months of growing, they will die when the really hard frosts start to hit. And so you'll have just kind of a dead plant in your garden over the winter. And this is it's nicer than using like the plastic cover or just a normal mulch, because they also have the root system that's holding things in place, holding the soil in place. So every time it snows or we get really hard freezes, it's actually helping to protect the soil nutrients in your garden bed. Then come April and you're ready to start thinking about gardening again, you go in there, you have this dead plant that's really easy to just, you can use like a mower, or you can use a little like scythe or something, and you just start to like break it up a little and turn it into the soil, and you can start planting right away because it's already a dead plant, so you're good to go. Winter hardy cover crops are different because you can plant them a little later in the season. So say you do want to plant, some more root vegetables and greens and herbs. And then in September, October, you harvest those and you decide you want to put in the winter hardy cover crop. And so that's something like crimson clover, which is pictured here. This is my coworker Chantel's favorite cover crop. I told her I'd give her a shout out for it. And so with winter hardy cover crops, they'll keep growing. If it's a mild winter, they'll grow the entire winter long. And then if it's a really cold winter, they might go dormant in like January, February, and then they'll come back in March and April, and they'll actually continue growing. And so since they are hardy and they've been growing more, they do add more nutrients into your soil. But then once you're ready to plant in like May, you're gonna have to do a little more work because they're still alive. So you have to really mow or cut them down. It takes a little more effort. Turn them into the soil, same as the other ones. And then you have to wait 2 to 4 weeks for all that live plant material to decompose in your bed. And then you can plant your spring plants. So that's just the difference between them. But the easiest thing to do is get a blend, plant it in September, and let it do its thing. Don't think about it in April, cut them down, work them into the soil, and you're good to go. So those are cover crops. Like a very I tried to be brief, but somewhat in-depth, but we can, I have some guides attached to our follow-up resources for you as well. And then before we start taking questions again for today, I'll just go over a couple of fun harvest recipe ideas. This one is super simple, using up all of your cool weather crops here: greens, radishes, garlic, and fresh herbs. You can do a really nice saute, and we'll post this in the follow-up resource. And then this one's a little more unconventional, a bit creative here. It's like another take on zoodles or zucchini noodles, but you can do a similar thing. Carrot and parsnip. And you just peel them into ribbons so that they look a little like fettuccine, and then you can saute them in olive oil and add your favorite pasta toppings to them. So that's all of the information I will share with you in the presentation, but happy to take some questions now if people have them.
All right, we've got a couple in the chat, so I'll read those out.
Okay.
And then if you want to unmute and yell out your questions, you can, or you can keep reading them from the chat, whatever's more fun. So
you might also be able to raise, can people raise their hand? Because
they can do that too. Yeah.
I'll start. Okay.
Would you plant cover crops in a container garden?
Yeah, I think you could. Yeah, you definitely could. And it'll have the same same benefits as the others. It also depends like how much depth your garden beds or containers have. I think, Kristen, were you the one who was saying that this oilseed radish can grow up to 6 feet
6
deep?
Is it
like the taproot grows really far down?
Yeah, I've read that. I was like, that's insane.
Yeah, I think cover crops are generally planted in larger growing spaces, like a full, and by larger I mean like a 4 foot by 8 foot garden bed, or if you're doing row gardening. For containers, it'll still work, but containers are also easier to just add some compost to as well in the spring. So that might be less effort for you, but it would still work, I think.
The winter hardy cover crops, when should they cut them down?
You can cut them down in the same time of year in April or May that you would do as well. Start incorporating the winter killed crops. The only thing is you'll have to wait, the 2 to 4 weeks so that the plant material has time to decompose before you plant stuff. So what a lot of people do, if you're not doing a blend and you do want to be really intentional about what's going in each bed, people will do winter killed cover crops in beds where they're planting early in the spring. So if you wanted to plant like lettuces and things like that early in the spring, you do that in beds with winter killed cover crops because those will be ready first. Then you wait your 2 to 4 weeks, and by that time probably the frost date has passed and you can do your warmer weather crops like your seedling transplants, things like that, like tomatoes and peppers.
Okay. Next one up is this person is growing, but they only really get about 6 hours of sun in their yard. So what fall crops will do better with less sun?
That's a good question. I've noticed that a lot of cold tolerant crops are generally also the ones that can make do with less sunlight. So they're more shade tolerant as well. So a lot of the things on this list would work. And I think pretty much everything on this list would be okay with 6 hours if it's direct sun. The brassicas might be the only thing that won't do as well without enough sun, because they're like those really big leafy things. They do need a lot of energy to grow into the full plants. So if I were you, I would stick to these things like radish, carrot, turnips, beets, parsley, mint, lettuces, things like that.
Okay. Sorry, I'm copying over all your questions here. What kind of tools can they use to make sure that their soil is healthy for planting?
That's a good question. I guess they're referring to soil testing.
Testing, yeah.
That's something I've personally, like, I don't do that myself. I kind of just, you can look at your soil and feel your soil and be able to tell a lot of things about it, which is what I've always relied on. If your soil is like a nice kind of a deeper, I don't even want to say the colors because it can vary based on what nutrients are in your soil. There's not like, oh, it has to be dark brown. I guess one way to think of it is like, take a handful and feel it with your hands. If it feels really like sandy or silty, then you probably, it is sandy or silty and it needs more nutrients, like compost added to it. If your soil, when you pick it up and squeeze it in your hands, if it has like clay, then it's too heavy and you're going to want to add in sand or other type of topsoil, but no more compost probably. And you want to plant some of those cover crops that are actually really good for loosening up compacted soil. There's also a way to observe your soil as to how it's draining. And there's some little like DIY, which you can do at home experiments where you take soil and you watch and see how long it takes for water to filter through and pass through it. And that'll also tell you if it's going through too fast, again, it's too thin, the soil. If it's going really slow, then you need to loosen it up a bit. But then there are other like tools you can order, I believe, like online or find at a garden store that will test your soil for pH and nutrients and things like that. So you know exactly what you need to add back into the soil. Or you can send soil samples to a laboratory.
Yeah, or there's like pretty inexpensive kits you can do at home to test, or you can send them away. Brooklyn Urban Soil Lab is one. Brooklyn College, the soil lab there, they do pretty low cost testing. And someone's saying in the chat that there's some organizations that do soil testing for free in the spring. So in the Bronx, cool. The Bronx River Alliance does some soil testing. Yeah, that's actually new to us too. Thank you for sharing that. We will follow up on that.
Yeah. It also,
and there's like, if you're not like, there's testing you can do for like hard contaminants, but I think what your question is like more for just general like pH and nutrient compounds, so you know what to plant. Probably find some kits for that pretty easily.
Yeah.
Okay, is there a specific type of soil to use? Somebody has a backyard, but it just has grass, so they're not sure if like they can just, start planting.
That's a really good question. When we get that question a lot. For planting in the city, we don't usually recommend planting directly in ground because city soil can have a lot of different contaminants in it, and it's even hard to like test for all of the different possible contaminants. So we do recommend that people have some sort of container or raised bed that they're planting in. And to fill that, the best option is to get garden or potting soil.
It's upstate. It's upstate.
It's upstate.
Oh, okay.
I was gonna say, because like my mom has a garden up in the Hudson Valley and her soil is fine to plant straight in the ground. So in that case, and you just have grass, you're gonna have to rip up the grass somehow. You might need to borrow a tiller or get a tiller, or just get a lot of people with shovels to help you out with that, and clear the space of the grass. And then you would want to get a decent amount of compost to add into the soil as well, because usually just like backyard soil doesn't, and that you've just been growing, one type of grass in that's been there for goodness knows how long, you do want to add some nutrients into it. So even if you didn't want to plant crops this like summer and fall, this would be a great time to clear the space, get in some cover crops, which will really add to your soil, and then start in earnest in the spring. That's what I would recommend.
Thank you.
Sure.
You're welcome. That's just fun that people can like clarify.
Yeah, I was like, oh, I didn't go on a
Actually,
tangent that was not relevant.
On the same note of containers, what plants are good for containers? Folks are asking.
We have a whole workshop on container planting on our distance learning site. So that would be great for you to check out if you really want to get in depth on it. Out of this list, a lot of these can be container planted, especially if you have a big container. I think the easiest ones are the greens and the herbs because you don't need a lot of depth for those. So you can plant those in, just normal pots. If you're doing root veggies, you're going to need something deeper and wider. Same with brassicas, deeper and wider. For these, I would recommend getting something that's at least the size of a 5-gallon bucket or a milk crate.
Yeah, someone's saying in the chat too, just to check on, one other thing about the soil testing, like even if you're outside the city, it's still a good idea to get soil tested. You kind of never know like what was happening in and around your area. Streams are also like some good ways that contaminants could have been carried. If there was like a factory or something upstream of you historically, you could be having some lingering stuff in your soil there. So not to scare anybody, but yes, thank you for throwing that in the chat. It's a good reminder. Also, sometimes you can go to your local library and they'll have like historical maps. So you can see like what was in your neighborhood. One, it's fascinating just because it's very fun, but it's also a good indicator of if there's something you might want to be, thinking about in your yard space. Somebody would really like to know where they can get sage transplants.
Oh, I think, and like most garden centers, I would expect them to have it. Although I've also been in a position where I go to like 3 different nurseries and they don't have what I want there. But I would expect them to have sage. And if they don't, you could try planting it from seed, try something new. I think that one would be okay to plant from seed this time of year. And then you could also, if you have like a connection with another gardener, they might have some sage that they could split up and make you a little seedling out of it.
Yeah, that's someone just said in the chat. You can take a sprig of sage, put it in some water, wait till it grows roots. And
propagation.
Yeah, just propagate your own. Let's see. Yes, also just a comment, we are totally going to share this presentation. So you'll have the chart, lots of questions about that chart. You'll totally have it.
I know, that chart's a good chart.
It's a great chart. So you'll have this whole presentation, that way you can look back and you can reference all of the different resources. And there's other resources too that like maybe we kind of only loosely talked about, and they're gonna all be in the follow-up here too.
Yeah, one thing I couldn't fit into like a half-hour presentation is season extension, which is using different methods to prolong your growing season into the fall and into the winter. And that includes using like, those little tunnels that you see in gardens and farms, which is actually a really inexpensive way to keep growing for into December and stuff. But we have a whole other workshop on that on our distance learning site as well. So we'll give you all the links. So if you want to keep going down this rabbit hole, you definitely can.
Yeah, we've got a couple of people that are thinking about tunnels for kale. Okay. And they're surprisingly warm. Like when you kind of, you're outside and you put your hand inside the little tunnel, it's like a noticeable difference in the temperature inside. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
You're getting many thanks. So many thanks. Sounds like folks enjoyed the presentation today.
Great.
So, we hope it helps. You'll have it. You can look back. You can feel free to reach out to us with questions, and we can stick around.
I must say out loud, excuse me if I may, like this was so straightforward and just very easy to digest. Like I've listened to so many other programs or like informationals like on YouTube or elsewhere. Ice cream truck is passing, excuse me. But I listened to so many of them and they've just been so scientifically technical, but this was so digestible. I must thank you, Laura. Thank you so much. Thank you.
I'm so glad. Thank you. That's awesome.
we always like to joke around that we will share all of our like tips and tricks, but also our failures too, so that like you all feel comfortable when you're growing. It's like this is all trial and error for us. So so it's really good that we're glad you appreciate it.
Yeah, we've got a year plus worth of virtual workshops on GrowNYC distancelearning.org, and we do have some upcoming ones in September as well. So in the follow-up email, we'll have the links so you can register again through Eventbrite. We have one on seed saving and one on edible garden weeds and more. So those are our 2 upcoming September workshops. And you can also feel free to email us at schoolgardens@grownyc.org if you have any additional questions for us. I think that's it.
Awesome. Yeah, and some questions about farmers markets in Queens. If you go to GrowNYC.org, there's actually a little map, and you can put your zip code in, or you can just kind of zoom around on that map and you can see what markets are happening. And it's got their dates, times, and hours, and their seasons. Some are year round and some are seasonal. So yeah,
we do have some good ones in Queens though.
Oh yeah.
I'm a fan.
What's your favorite Queens market, Laura?
Corona
yeah,
Plaza.
Corona's a good one. Yeah.
I worked with that one. But Jackson Heights is a really popular one. That's like the star of Queens green markets.
Very cool.
Anywho.
Yeah, Maria knows it. She's like, there you go, 76th Street in Jackson Heights. Great. Yeah, and Maria, we'll check for your email. We'll look. So, all right, everyone. Thank you so much, and hopefully we'll see you soon at our next couple of workshops that are coming up. So you'll see them. They'll come to your email this week. And thank you for learning with us today.
Yes, thank you all so much. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.